Hey, so tonight we're diving into something pretty wild, the American frontier. Not the polished version you memorized in history class, but the raw, gritty, sometimes downright filthy truth of how people actually survived on the edge of civilization. And hey, if you've been enjoying these stories, I'd genuinely appreciate a like or a subscribe. I'm always curious where folks are tuning in from, so drop a comment with your location and the time it is where you are. It never stops amazing me that people from all over the world are drifting off to sleep with this playing. Alright, now find that cozy spot. Take a nice, slow breath. Let your body sink into whatever you're lying on, because we're about to head deep into the American frontier. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll feel extra thankful for that mattress you're on. So here we go. Congratulations, you've just woken up in a one-room log cabin somewhere out on the American frontier around the year 1790. Your eyes slowly adjust to the dim, muted light filtering through a window made not of glass, but oiled paper, because glass is a luxury out here, one few can afford. You're lying on a corn husk mattress, set atop a plain wooden frame, and it softly crackles beneath you as you shift your weight. The hewn logs making up the walls still carry the scent of pine sap, sweet, sharp, and earthy in the morning air. You let your bare feet touch the packed dirt floor, cool, gritty, grounding. From outside, you hear a distant rooster crow, followed by the snort of a pig rooting near the cabin. The smell of last night's wood smoke lingers faintly in the air, mixing with the earthy aroma of beans still sitting in the cast iron pot, hanging cold over the hearth. This is life on the American frontier. And in fewer than 70 years, the United States will stretch from the original 13 colonies, covering roughly 300,000 square miles, to a continental giant spanning a staggering 2.8 million square miles. It will become one of the most rapid, aggressive land expansions in all of human history. And you, my friend, are about to step into what it really meant to live through that transformation. The good news? You're about to witness one of the most astonishing eras of exploration and settlement the world has ever seen. The bad news? It's going to be brutal, truly, relentlessly brutal. The American frontier wasn't just hard, it was deadly. A landscape of near-constant warfare, impossible terrain, and weather so fierce it could take you out faster than any human foe. Surviving here? It took a certain kind of wild. You pull a rough woolen shirt over your head, the fabric scratchy and stiff, hand-spun and dyed a muddy brown with walnut husks. No bright colors out here. You work with whatever nature hands you. Your pants are buckskin, worn buttery soft from years of use, patched at the knees where they've been thinned by wear and labor. As you step outside, the mist still clings low over the fields beyond your cabin. Your closest neighbor? About 3 miles off. The edge of the forest? Just 50 yards from your door. That forest holds deer and wild turkey, sure, but also wolves, bears, and, yes, sometimes hostile Native American warriors who, let's be honest, have every reason to be angry about settlers like you showing up on their land. You settle back a bit deeper into your bed as we begin our journey back into those wild, unforgiving days. Your muscles ease, your breath slows. And now, let me introduce you to one of the most legendary frontiersmen of all time. A man whose life feels like something ripped from an action movie, only wilder. Daniel Boone. You've probably heard the name. Maybe pictured him wearing a raccoon skin cap? Funny thing is, he actually preferred a wide-brimmed felt hat. Daniel Boone was a legendary explorer, immortalized in novels and old-school films. He played a pivotal role in opening up the American frontier during the Revolutionary War, most famously when he discovered the Cumberland Gap, a critical passage into Kentucky. He blazed the Wilderness Road, a path that would lead countless others westward into the untamed wilds. The Wilderness Road, another crucial passage westward, was one of Boone's many daring achievements. And through it all, he lived a life packed with truly wild adventures. Born in 1734 in Pennsylvania to a devout Quaker family, Daniel Boone began learning to hunt almost as soon as he could walk. Instead of spending his youth in schoolrooms, young Daniel would vanish for days at a time into the forest, living off the land and mastering the secrets of the wilderness. By the time he reached his teenage years, he had become a master tracker, able to follow a deer for miles simply by noticing the bend of a grass stem or the subtle shift of a single stone. He moved so silently through the woods that animals rarely sensed him before it was too late, his rifle already raised and aimed. Eventually, the Boone family relocated to North Carolina, where Daniel met and married Rebecca, a woman as tough and tenacious as he was. She was fiercely capable, fully prepared to defend their homestead with a rifle during the long periods Daniel was away on expeditions. Together, they had 10 children, a number that was surprisingly typical for that era. More children meant more help working the land and, sadly, a higher chance that at least some would survive. Frontier life was perilous, especially for the young. Infant mortality was staggering. Nearly 1 in 3 children died before reaching their 5th birthday. But one of Daniel Boone's most intense, cinematic adventures unfolded in 1776, a year after he had founded the town of Boonesboro, right in the heart of Revolutionary War tensions. In July of that year, Boone's 14-year-old daughter, Jemima, was kidnapped, along with 2 other teenage girls, Betsy and Fanny Calloway. The girls had gone down to the river to do laundry, chatting about whatever young women might have discussed in 1776, likely the drudgery of churning butter or the hopeful prospects of eligible young men in the settlement. What they didn't realize was that they were being watched. A group of Shawnee warriors, sent by the British to harass and disrupt American settlements in Kentucky, had spotted them. The British, desperate to retain their grip on the frontier, were actively enlisting Native American tribes to attack revolutionary settlers. Seeing an opportunity, the Shawnee paddled silently across the river, snatched the girls, and vanished into the forest before anyone in Boonesboro knew what had happened. Imagine the panic. 3 girls gone without a trace, save for some overturned wash baskets and a trail of footprints vanishing into the dense wilderness. When Boone got the news that his daughter had been taken, he wasn't just alarmed. He was enraged. He wasted no time, gathering a small group of men that included the fathers of the other 2 girls. They launched into the forest immediately, determined to bring them back. This wasn't just a father's desperate mission. It was Daniel Boone, one of the greatest woodsmen in American history, unleashing every hard-earned skill he had. The Shawnee had a strong head start and were moving fast, heading for a village near present-day Chillicothe, Ohio, around 160 miles away. It was a formidable distance to cover on foot, especially across forests and rivers. Still, Boone and his rescue party pushed forward, tracking the abductors with near-mystical precision. They tore through thick underbrush, crossed streams, climbed steep hills, and barely paused to rest, surviving on dried venison and cornmeal. At night, they took turns keeping watch, grabbing what little sleep they could. The Shawnee weren't careless. They tried every trick in the book to throw their pursuers off, from doubling back on their trail to walking through rivers to erase footprints. They even split up, rejoining later in an attempt to confuse the trackers. But Boone was better. He could read the land the way you or I read a book. A snapped twig here, a single scuff on a rock there, a faint mark in moss. Each detail telling him exactly where the party had gone. After 3 relentless days of pursuit, Boone and his men finally caught up. The Shawnee had made camp for the evening. The 3 girls sat close together, exhausted, terrified, but thankfully unharmed. Boone knew rushing in too fast might get the girls hurt, so he waited, watching from the trees as darkness fell. The warriors cooked a meal, oblivious to the men silently surrounding them. When most of the camp had settled in, with only 2 guards still awake, Boone gave the signal. The rescue party exploded into action, emerging from all sides at once. They fired long rifles, charged with tomahawks and knives. The ambush was total. Several Shawnee were taken down in the first volley, and the rest fled into the night, leaving behind everything, including the girls. Jemima ran straight into her father's arms, overcome with relief. Within minutes, Boone's party had secured the area and begun the long trek back to Boonesboro. This dramatic rescue became one of the most iconic frontier legends of all time. Later, it was loosely adapted into James Fenimore Cooper's novel The Last of the Mohicans, though the author took liberties with the facts. The real story? A father tracking his daughter's kidnappers through 160 miles of untamed wilderness, without embellishment, was already more than enough. If this is all starting to sound like Taken, but with buckskin instead of a leather jacket, you're not wrong. Daniel Boone had a particular set of skills honed through decades of life in the wild, skills that made him an absolute nightmare for anyone foolish enough to threaten his family. But Boone's adventures didn't stop there. Just 2 years later, in 1778, the tide would turn in a shocking way. The Revolutionary War was still in full swing, and British forces had forged alliances with several Native American tribes to strike against American frontier settlements. In September of that year, a large force of Shawnee warriors, led by Chief Blackfish and backed by British officers, laid siege to Boonesborough. The Shawnee took up positions around the fort, effectively sealing off all escape routes. Inside, Boone and the settlers prepared for war. Women melted down pewter plates and cups to cast bullets. Children rushed water from the well, ready to douse any fires that might be sparked. The men manned the walls, rifles ready. The defenders were outnumbered and outgunned, but the fort itself was strong, built from thick logs with a defensive palisade encircling it. The Shawnee tried everything to break in. They launched flaming arrows, hoping to burn the fort down. They dug tunnels beneath the walls. They even offered false peace terms, hoping to trick the settlers into surrender. But the defenders held firm. Days stretched into weeks. Supplies inside dwindled, ammunition was scarce, food was being carefully rationed, and the relentless stress of siege wore tempers thin. Then, things got worse. Several enslaved men, yes, even frontier legends like Daniel Boone participated in the grim practice of slavery, defected to the Shawnee. They took with them badly needed ammunition and revealed vital information about the fort's vulnerabilities. Eventually, after nearly 2 full weeks under siege, the settlers, running out of options, were eventually forced to negotiate with the Shawnee. Boone, who already knew their language and customs from earlier encounters, stepped forward to lead the talks. But it was a trap. During what appeared to be peaceful negotiations, the Shawnee suddenly attempted to seize Boone and the other representatives. A violent struggle broke out. The settlers barely managed to fight their way back and retreat behind the fort's walls. The siege dragged on for several more grueling days, but the Shawnee, having failed both in direct assault and deception, finally withdrew. Boonesborough had survived, but not without cost. Several settlers were killed or wounded, and the fort's supplies were dangerously low. Still, this was not the end of Boone's complicated relationship with the Shawnee. Earlier that very same year, before the siege even began, Boone had been captured by a group of Shawnee while out on a salt-making expedition. But instead of executing him, Chief Blackfish chose to adopt Boone into the tribe, a custom shared by many Native American nations, who often welcomed captives to replace lost members of their community. They gave Boone a new name, Sheltawi, which meant Big Turtle. And for several months, Boone lived among the Shawnee. He learned their language more deeply, studied their traditions, hunted with them, shared meals, and became a part of their daily rhythms. Historians debate what Boone truly felt during this time. Some believe he cleverly integrated himself with the Shawnee purely as a survival tactic, biding his time and planning his escape all along. Others suggest he developed a genuine respect for the tribe's culture, possibly even forming real bonds with the people around him. Either way, when Boone learned that the Shawnee were preparing a major assault on Boonesborough, he knew it was time to act. Early one morning, he quietly slipped away from the village, embarking on a daring and dangerous journey through the wilderness. He covered 160 miles on foot in just 4 days. It was an incredible feat of stamina and grit, especially across rugged terrain. His goal, to reach the settlers before the attack came. You shift slightly in your bed, easing into the perfect spot as your breathing naturally slows. The journey through the American frontier continues, and your body softens into comfort as the next story begins, this time about another legendary figure whose life would be no less dramatic and whose legacy would reach even farther. This man journeyed from the untamed wilds to the halls of government, from backwoods hunting grounds to congressional chambers. He stood toe-to-toe with presidents and would ultimately die for a cause he believed in. Davy Crockett. Even his name feels like it was designed for legend. Unlike Daniel Boone, who was born before the birth of the nation, Crockett entered the world as a citizen of the newly formed United States. He was born on August 17, 1786 in eastern Tennessee, though at the time, that land was still part of North Carolina. His parents were poor farmers, scraping out a life in a small log cabin not so different from the one you imagined waking up in earlier. That cabin was a single room with a dirt floor and a leaky roof. At night, young Davy would lie on a straw-stuffed pallet and watch stars through the gaps in the ceiling. In winter, snow sometimes drifted in through those same cracks, frosting the sleeping children in white. With 8 siblings crammed into one room, privacy was a foreign concept. They all ate, slept, and lived in that one shared space, with only the firelight from the hearth to chase away the cold and darkness. Life was hard. His father, John Crockett, constantly struggled with debt. When Davy was just 12 years old, his father hired him out to a cattle drover in order to pay off what he owed. Just imagine, 12 years old, sent off with strangers to drive cattle for hundreds of miles through untamed wilderness. That was frontier life. The cattle drive was harsh. Davy walked from sunrise to sunset beside the lumbering herd, his moccasins falling apart, his feet blistered and bleeding. At night, he collapsed by the fire, too exhausted to do anything but choke down some cornmeal mush before falling into dreamless sleep. Rain drenched him. The sun scorched his skin. Mosquitoes swarmed him. But still, he pressed on. When the drive ended, he was supposed to return home, but instead, he found himself abandoned in a strange town, hundreds of miles from his family, without a cent to his name. Most children in that situation might have broken, but not Davy Crockett. He took odd jobs wherever he could find them. He saved every penny he earned. He slept in barns and stables, or under open skies when the weather allowed. He ate whatever he could, sometimes just berries or wild nuts plucked from the forest edge. And slowly, over the course of 2 long, hard years, he made his way back home to Tennessee. That early hardship forged him. By the time he turned 18, Crockett had become fully self-reliant. He struck out again, this time as a seasoned cattle driver, guiding livestock through wild country to markets in Virginia and Georgia. Word quickly spread of his skill. He became known as a sharpshooter, a survivalist, a man who could handle himself in even the harshest terrain. You settle a little deeper under your blanket, feeling the soft fabric of your pillow against your cheek. The weight of the covers is perfect, not too heavy, not too light, just enough to make you feel safe and held. Now, there's one story about Davy Crockett that feels like it was pulled straight from the movie The Revenant, except it happened nearly 200 years earlier. It was the fall of 1825. Crockett was deep in the Tennessee woods near his home, out hunting. The forest was alive with the colors of autumn, fiery red maples, golden hickories, and rich green pines. The ground was soft beneath his boots, blanketed in decades of fallen needles and leaves. The air was crisp and musky, carrying the scent of decay and the promise of coming frost. Crockett was silently stalking a deer through the underbrush, when instead, he came face to face with a black bear. Now, an American black bear can weigh over 600 pounds and stand taller than most men. This was not something to underestimate. Crockett raised his rifle and fired. The gunshot echoed through the trees like a thunderclap, scattering birds in a flurry of wings. But the bear was so close and so massive that the single shot didn't bring it down. Instead, it charged. It barreled toward Crockett with terrifying speed. One massive paw slammed into him, knocking him to the ground and sending his rifle flying into the underbrush. The bear's hot breath hit his face, reeking of blood and wild meat. Its weight pressed down on his chest, crushing the air from his lungs. In that moment, most men would have given up. But Davy Crockett wasn't most men. With the bear pinning him down, he managed to reach for the hunting knife at his belt. And then, man and beast clashed, rolling across the forest floor in a brutal, close-quarters struggle. Crockett slashed and stabbed, driving the blade again and again into thick fur and muscle. The bear roared in rage, its claws tearing into Crockett's body, shredding his buckskin clothing and the flesh beneath. Blood, both man and beast, soaked into the earth. For long minutes, the outcome teetered on a knife's edge. And then, finally, one of Crockett's strikes pierced the bear's heart. The enormous beast gave one final convulsion, a deep, guttural growl tearing from its throat, and then collapsed completely. Davy Crockett, battered and bloodied, lay motionless beside the dead bear, struggling to catch his breath. His body was wrecked, covered in slashes, deep bruises, and oozing wounds. One leg was clearly broken, and he was miles away from the nearest settlement, surrounded by unforgiving wilderness. And yet, somehow he survived. He managed to drag himself to a nearby creek, crawling through brush and leaves, where he washed his injuries as best he could. Then, using his rifle as a crude crutch, he began limping home, each step a battle. What normally would have taken him just a few hours ended up costing him nearly 2 days. When he finally reached his cabin, he was delirious with fever, trembling with exhaustion and pain. His wife did all she could. She treated his wounds with poultices made from herbs she had gathered, wrapping his broken leg with long strips of cloth. For weeks, Davy lingered in a fog of infection, caught between life and death, without the aid of modern medicine, let alone antibiotics. But as he had done so many times before, he pulled through. Whether the bear story unfolded exactly as described or became embroidered over time doesn't really matter. The point wasn't just the bear, it was the man. Crockett was shaping a public legend, crafting a larger-than-life image of frontier courage and survival that would help launch his political career. And it worked. In 1827, he was elected to the Tennessee state legislature. That same year, he secured a seat in the United States House of Representatives. Imagine the scene: Davy Crockett, dressed in rugged frontier garb, stepping into the marbled halls of Congress in Washington, D.C. While other lawmakers strolled past in tailored coats and polished boots, adorned with cravats and silk, Crockett often arrived in his weathered buckskin jacket, looking far more like a tracker or hunter than a politician. He didn't speak like the others either. There were no fancy flourishes or rehearsed speeches. Crockett spoke plainly, in the language of the people. And that's exactly what made the people love him. One event that helped solidify his fame came from an unlikely place: the stage. A play called The Lion of the West began making waves. The main character didn't carry his name, but he was unmistakably based on Crockett. This theatrical satire painted a bold, blustering, charismatic frontiersman, one full of wild stories, homespun wisdom, and no shortage of swagger. Beneath the bravado, though, was a figure with a heart of gold. Audiences adored it. The character's charm and humor resonated deeply with Americans hungry for tales of grit and heroism. The play boosted Crockett's already rising profile, helping cement his place as an American folk hero. The timing of the play's success also aligned with the rise of another legendary frontiersman turned politician, Andrew Jackson, who became president in 1829. Like Crockett, Jackson came from humble beginnings in Tennessee. Both had fought Native American tribes. Both projected themselves as tough, independent men of the people, not polished elites. At first, Crockett supported Jackson enthusiastically, but that alliance wouldn't last. During his years in Congress, from 1827 to 1835, Crockett became increasingly frustrated with what he saw as government overreach and wasteful spending. Though technically aligned with the Whig Party, he was fiercely independent, often clashing with party leaders and refusing to toe the line. One of his deepest frustrations was how quickly and recklessly he believed the federal government spent taxpayers' money, funneling it into unnecessary projects, driven more by politics than by people's needs. And as Jackson's presidency progressed, Crockett's criticisms became more pointed, even personal. The breaking point came with the Indian Removal Act of 1830, a piece of legislation fiercely supported by Jackson. It gave the president sweeping powers to negotiate with Native American tribes in the southeastern U.S., relocating them west of the Mississippi River in exchange for their ancestral lands. At first, Crockett supported the idea. He believed, perhaps naively, that the move might actually protect Native Americans from white encroachment, giving them new land to build upon, away from increasing conflict. He also recognized the opportunity it offered for expanding American settlements. But the more he learned, the more disturbed he became. Letters poured in from his constituents, many of them voicing strong opposition, especially when it came to the Cherokee of Tennessee. These were not hostile outsiders. Many had adopted European-style agriculture, built homes, created a written language, and converted to Christianity. In many ways, they had assimilated into the American ideal, yet they were still being targeted for removal. Crockett saw injustice. He began to view the Indian Removal Act not as a practical policy, but as a violation of American principles of justice, fairness, and basic human dignity. In a fiery speech before Congress, he condemned the act outright. He argued that the government had no right to displace people who had done nothing wrong, people who had lived on that land for generations. He famously declared, "I would sooner be honestly damned than hypocritically immortalized," making it clear he would rather lose his seat in Congress than support something he believed was morally indefensible. Despite his protest, the act passed. What followed was the trail of tears, a forced march that uprooted approximately 16,000 Cherokee from their homes. Of those, around 4,000 died from exposure, illness, and starvation. Crushed by the decision and disillusioned by politics, Crockett made his own. He wouldn't seek re-election. In 1835, he turned to his constituents and delivered one of the most famous lines in frontier history. "You may all go to hell, and I will go to Texas." And true to his word, that's exactly what he did. Texas at that time was still part of Mexico, but it was brimming with unrest. American settlers, frustrated with Mexican rule, were pushing for independence. Crockett arrived in San Antonio in early 1836 and quickly joined a small group of volunteers preparing to defend the Alamo, a former Spanish mission that had been transformed into a fortress. Though the Alamo wasn't built for war, it was all the Texians, as the rebel settlers called themselves, had. Its crumbling walls and modest courtyard were no match for a real military siege. Still, they made it work. Alongside Crockett were several other frontier legends, including Jim Bowie, of Bowie knife fame. Opposing them was the well-trained, well-equipped Mexican army under General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. The siege began, and for 13 days, the defenders held strong against overwhelming odds. Inside, conditions deteriorated fast. Food supplies ran dangerously low. Water had to be fetched from a nearby well, under constant threat of enemy fire. Ammunition was limited. The defenders took shifts to rest, but even that sleep was fractured by cannon blasts and rumors of incoming assaults. Despite being new to the cause, Crockett rose quickly as a leader. His seasoned instincts, his calming presence, and his natural charisma gave courage to younger, less experienced fighters. In the thick of it all, he stood tall, shoulder to shoulder with the men who had chosen to fight and die for an ideal. The others in the fort instinctively turned to him for guidance and strength. Davy Crockett was often seen walking the perimeter walls, his trusted rifle, Betsy, in hand, offering steady encouragement to younger men who had never faced a real siege before. He spoke calmly, quietly, reminding them why they stood where they stood. Then came the morning of March 6, 1836. It was still dark, pre-dawn silence blanketing the mission when the attack began. The distant blare of drums and the sharp wail of bugles sliced through the night. The final Mexican assault was underway. Thousands of soldiers were moving in, encircling the Alamo from every direction. Inside, the Texian defenders jumped to their posts. They fired rifles and manned cannons, pouring everything they had into the advancing ranks. The air filled with acrid smoke, with the thunder of gunfire, and with shouts. Orders shouted, cries of pain, the chaos of desperation. Bullets tore through the night as the defenders fought to hold the line. And as you listen, your breath naturally slows. Your body feels heavier, softer. With each inhale, you settle deeper into comfort. Yet your mind remains alert, still following the unfolding tale of Davy Crockett's final stand. The battle didn't last long. In less than 2 hours, the superior Mexican force had breached the walls. What followed was chaos, a frantic, brutal fight from room to room, as the defenders resisted to the very end. To this day, no one knows for sure how Davy Crockett died. Some accounts say he was among the very last to fall, fighting valiantly until he was finally overrun. Others claim he and a few men were captured, then executed shortly after. A third version describes him dying in the courtyard, surrounded by the bodies of Mexican soldiers he had taken down. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: Davy Crockett's legend only grew stronger in death. He became an enduring symbol of American courage and defiance. A man who stood firm in the face of overwhelming odds, who refused to back down from what he believed was right. He had sacrificed a political career, walked away from power, and ultimately gave his life in defense of something bigger than himself. News of the Alamo spread quickly. The story of Crockett's death and the hopeless bravery of the Alamo defenders swept across the United States. The phrase, "Remember the Alamo," echoed from town halls to campfires, fueling a surge of support for the Texian cause. And just weeks later, that cause would triumph. Sam Houston led the Texian army to victory over Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto, securing Texas independence once and for all. From a poor farm boy in the rugged hills of Tennessee, to a congressman who stood his ground against a sitting president, to a martyr who fell in the dust of a crumbling mission far from home. Davy Crockett lived and died as a true embodiment of the frontier spirit. His unwavering willingness to stand up for what he believed, even when it cost him everything, set him apart from many of his peers. And it's exactly that fierce independence, that combination of grit, conviction, and charisma, that has kept his legend alive for nearly 2 centuries. Today, Crockett remains etched in American memory, not just as a frontiersman or a soldier, but as a symbol of how far one person can go when they follow their own path, no matter the cost. You feel yourself sinking deeper now, the story still echoing as your body relaxes further into the warmth of your bed. Your breath is slow and steady. Your mind gently drifts, replaying images of wild frontier landscapes, echoing courage, and the kind of quiet strength that can only be found in those who stand where others fall. As the chapter on Davy Crockett closes, we continue our journey westward, toward the next legend, the next map yet to be drawn. Your body feels heavy in the most comforting way, your limbs warm and wrapped in stillness. Now we turn the page to another figure, another path, one shaped not only by wilderness, but by ambition, politics, and the urge not just to discover new lands, but to rule them. A man named John C. Fremont, a complex character whose story reads like a swirling mix of epic adventure and political intrigue. Fremont was born in 1813 under a cloud of scandal. He was the child of an unwed mother and a French immigrant father who died when he was young, a background that carried serious stigma in that era. Raised by his mother in Charleston, South Carolina, young John still managed to receive a strong education. He quickly showed a natural talent for mathematics and surveying. Unlike Boone or Crockett, who learned their frontier skills through hard living and necessity, Fremont came to exploration through formal routes. In 1833, at just 20 years old, he joined the U.S. Navy and began teaching mathematics aboard the USS Natchez. Imagine life aboard a wooden naval vessel in the 1830s. The constant roll of the sea beneath your boots, the thick salt air, the stifling heat below deck. The sailors slept in swaying hammocks, took turns on watch, and endured long weeks at sea. Discipline was rigid, space was limited, and privacy was non-existent. But through all this, Fremont was learning. He spent those early years exploring the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, mastering the tools of the surveyor's trade, measuring angles, charting coastlines, navigating by the stars. These skills would prove essential in the years to come as he set his sights westward. In 1838, Fremont was discharged from the Navy and moved to Washington, D.C., where he became an assistant to the chief clerk of the U.S. Bureau of Topographical Engineers. The role gave him access to influential political and scientific circles and led to one of the most important relationships of his life. Senator Thomas Hart Benton of Missouri was a powerful voice in favor of westward expansion. He had a brilliant, politically astute daughter named Jessie, just 16 when she met the 28-year-old Fremont. Despite the age gap and her father's initial resistance, the two fell deeply in love and eloped in 1841. Rather than turning against the couple, Benton became Fremont's greatest champion. With Benton's support, Fremont was appointed to lead a series of major surveying expeditions across the West. You shift slightly, your body sinking even deeper into the bed's embrace. The pillow beneath your head cradles you just right, as we follow Fremont's story into the uncharted landscapes of a young and restless nation. You walk beside the oxen, careful not to add extra strain to the slow-moving beasts. The trail stretches out endlessly before you, cutting through sweeping prairies where, in some places, the grass rises higher than your head. Mosquitoes and flies buzz incessantly around you and your animals, forming an irritating cloud that no amount of swatting can keep away. In the distance, you might spot a thundering herd of buffalo, thousands strong, the earth trembling beneath their combined weight. At night, the wagons are circled, not for defense, as popular lore might suggest, but to form a corral for the animals. You sleep under an endless sky, the Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a glowing river of stars. Even during summer, the air grows sharply cold, and you find yourself pulling your blanket tighter as the haunting howls of coyotes echo in the dark. This was the life that John C. Fremont and his team experienced while charting the Oregon Trail. But unlike the settlers who would follow in his path, Fremont wasn't migrating. He was on a scientific mission. He carried with him precision instruments, tools for measuring latitude and longitude, barometers for atmospheric pressure, thermometers to track temperature, and other essential devices of the surveyor's craft. With these instruments, he produced detailed maps and reports, records that would later guide thousands of pioneers as they ventured west. On this and later expeditions, Fremont was joined by Kit Carson, another legendary figure of the American frontier, whom we'll learn more about soon. Together, they traversed the Rocky Mountains, confirmed the existence of the Great Salt Lake, and mapped vast swaths of what would become the American West. But Fremont's legacy isn't without controversy, especially when examining his interactions with Native American tribes. Like many explorers of his era, his record regarding indigenous peoples is at best inconsistent and at worst deeply troubling. In 1844, during one expedition, Fremont and his men took over a Native American village near Utah's Great Salt Lake, likely belonging to the Shoshone or Ute, without consent. When the tribe returned and protested the occupation of their homes, Fremont's men destroyed their crops, leveled the village, and killed several who resisted. A year later, during an 1845 expedition in California, another violent episode unfolded. When one of Fremont's horses was stolen, likely by a member of the Klamath tribe, Fremont ordered a retaliatory strike on the entire village. His men burned homes and ended multiple lives, a response vastly out of proportion to the original offense. These events reveal the colonial mindset that often prevailed, one in which the property of European Americans was valued more than the lives and homes of indigenous people. As you continue listening, your breath naturally deepens. Each inhale and exhale slows, grounding you as the weight of your body sinks more deeply into the bed. Despite his harsh actions toward native populations, Fremont was paradoxically an abolitionist. He strongly opposed slavery, a stance that placed him ahead of many of his contemporaries. In this way, Fremont embodied a deep contradiction. He could be both forward-thinking and callously brutal. That contradiction reflected the broader complexity of American expansion, an era marked by both opportunity and devastation, often determined solely by one's identity and status. Fremont's most controversial act came in 1846, at the outset of the Mexican-American War. Officially, he had been sent to California, then still Mexican territory, to survey the land. But unofficially, his true mission may have been far more political. According to some accounts, President James K. Polk had tasked him with quietly encouraging rebellion among American settlers. At that time, California was sparsely populated. Around 7,000 Mexican citizens lived there, along with roughly 700 American settlers. The Mexican government was distant and under-resourced, and many Americans believed that California was destined to become part of the United States, whether by purchase or force. In Sonoma, Fremont met with a group of settlers to discuss possible independence from Mexico. At first, he was cautious about getting directly involved in political rebellion, but that didn't stop him from supplying the rebels with weapons and ammunition from his own stores. Then, on June 14, 1846, the settlers raised what would become known as the Bear Flag, a crude, handmade banner featuring a red star, a rough drawing of a grizzly bear, and the words California Republic. The fabric was pieced together from cotton and red flannel, and though simple in design, it would later serve as the inspiration for the California state flag. The Bear Flag revolt didn't last long. Within a month, U.S. forces arrived, seized control of the region, and replaced the banner with the stars and stripes. California was effectively annexed into the United States as part of the broader war against Mexico. Fremont's role in the uprising stirred immediate controversy. He had acted as a military officer without official authorization. Critics accused him of attempting to carve out his own private empire in California, while supporters saw him as a patriotic visionary. The situation escalated when Fremont was court-martialed for mutiny and insubordination. He denied having led the rebellion, despite overwhelming evidence, and was ultimately found guilty. However, President Polk, who may have issued the original covert orders, commuted his sentence. Even this setback couldn't derail Fremont's momentum. He prospered during the California Gold Rush, became one of the state's first two U.S. senators after it gained statehood in 1850, and in 1856 became the first ever presidential candidate for the newly established Republican Party. Though he lost that election to James Buchanan, Fremont remained an influential figure in national politics. When the Civil War broke out, Fremont joined the Union Army as a general. In 1861, while serving as military governor of Missouri, he issued a bold proclamation. All slaves owned by Confederates in the state would be declared free. This became known as the Fremont Emancipation, a dramatic and unprecedented step toward abolition. Reactions were deeply divided. Abolitionists and Union loyalists applauded the move. Slaveholders and Southern sympathizers were enraged. President Abraham Lincoln, though sympathetic to the anti-slavery cause, was concerned. Missouri was a key border state, and Lincoln feared that such an aggressive policy might push it into the Confederacy. He also believed that military commanders lacked the constitutional authority to make sweeping declarations of emancipation on their own. Despite agreeing with the spirit of Fremont's action, Lincoln asked him to amend the order. Fremont refused. As a result, Lincoln annulled the proclamation and replaced him with a new commander. The two men would later reconcile, and Lincoln appointed Fremont to another command post in Virginia, where he continued to fight for the Union cause. The Confederacy would push back hard, but this particular episode revealed something telling about Fremont: his strong-willed independence. He was the kind of man who followed his convictions, even when doing so brought him into direct conflict with political authority. Your breathing has naturally slowed by now. It's steady and calm. Each inhale a little deeper, each exhale a little softer. Your body feels heavier, wrapped in warmth, and so comfortably nestled into the bed beneath you. With that peaceful rhythm, we continue our journey through the rugged heart of the American frontier. Fremont's most consistent partner throughout his explorations and campaigns was another legendary figure, Kit Carson. But where Fremont brought a foundation of education and political pedigree, Carson brought something entirely different: a life forged through first-hand experience in the wilderness. Christopher Kit Carson was born on December 24, 1809, in Kentucky. His family soon moved to Missouri, but tragedy struck early. His father died when Kit was only 9 years old. With many mouths to feed, the young boy was apprenticed to a saddle maker by age 14. But Kit wasn't built for shop life. The repetitive, confined routine chafed at him. So, at the age of 16, driven by the promise of adventure, Carson ran away from his apprenticeship and joined a group of traders headed southwest, bound for Santa Fe, New Mexico. It was the first step on a long journey that would define him as one of the most iconic frontiersmen of his time. The trail to Santa Fe was no leisurely road. It cut through hundreds of miles of open prairie and harsh desert, territories that were not just physically challenging but politically volatile. These lands were home to many Native American tribes, some of whom viewed the increasing presence of American traders and settlers as an outright threat. Picture young Carson, a wiry teenager with a mop of unruly hair, riding alongside rugged men 3 times his age. His clothing, plain cotton and tan leather, was already dusty and sweat-soaked from the trail. His pale skin blistered in the punishing sun, peeling and raw before hardening into a weathered, leathery brown. The seasoned traders he traveled with became his teachers. They taught him to read animal tracks, find water in barren stretches, predict weather shifts by the sky, and communicate with native tribes using a blend of sign language, Spanish, and gestures. These weren't lessons found in books or classrooms. They were skills of survival, taught by firelight and tested under pressure. Upon arriving in Santa Fe, Carson found work as a fur trapper and mountain man. He would spend much of his early life navigating the unforgiving Rocky Mountains, trapping beavers and other fur-bearing animals for trade. This was not a life for the faint-hearted. Trappers lived in isolation for months at a time, battling not just the elements but also predators, hunger, injury, and disease. They crafted their own clothing from hides, cooked whatever they could hunt, and treated wounds with herbal remedies, often learned from Native American contacts. Navigating the vast and unmapped terrain required a kind of internal compass. There were no reliable maps, just stars, sun, landforms, and memory. In the winter months, trappers would converge at rendezvous points, temporary markets where they sold their furs, resupplied, and reconnected. These gatherings were wild, a chaotic mix of bartering, storytelling, games, and heavy drinking. Over time, Carson's reputation grew. He became known as one of the most dependable guides and sharpest hunters in the West. His experience made him invaluable, not just to trapping companies, but also to explorers and military leaders. He began guiding expeditions into the frontier, most notably the 1829 to 1830 expedition led by Ewing Young and another in 1832 to 1833 with Captain Benjamin Bonneville. Carson's knowledge of the West was encyclopedic. He could look at a stretch of landscape and tell you where the water was, which plants were safe to eat, whether the trail ahead was passable, and which tribes controlled the territory. This deep, almost instinctive understanding of the land made Carson indispensable to men like Fremont, who had training and backing, but not field-hard knowledge. As Carson's exploits spread eastward, so did his legend, thanks to a flood of dime novels. The life and adventures of Kit Carson became a sensation in eastern cities. These books exaggerated and romanticized his deeds, painting him as a superhuman frontier hero who never missed a shot and never lost a fight. The real Carson, however, was far more grounded and reportedly embarrassed by the tales. Being illiterate, he couldn't even read them himself. Yet despite his lack of formal education, Carson was a man of many skills. He spoke fluent Spanish and could converse in several Native American languages. He served as an Indian agent, attempting to mediate between settlers and tribes. He fought in the Mexican-American War and later served as a Union officer in the Civil War. Carson's life spanned a remarkable era, from the age of solitary mountain men to the construction of railroads and the rise of telegraph lines. He was there at the turning point, where wilderness gave way to nationhood. Your limbs feel a touch heavier now, the kind of weight that signals deep rest. Your body settles more completely into the mattress as we continue tracing the paths of these extraordinary individuals. Carson and Fremont first crossed paths in 1842 in St. Louis, Missouri. Fremont was preparing to lead his first expedition into the Western Territories and needed a seasoned guide. Someone mentioned Kit Carson, describing him as the best there was. When the two met, Fremont was surprised. Carson didn't fit the larger-than-life image the novels portrayed. He was small, barely 5'4", quiet, calm, and without any of the theatrical bluster so common among frontiersmen. But Fremont saw something in Carson's sharp eyes and steady voice. He trusted his instincts. Their conversation was brief and practical. Fremont laid out the plan, an ambitious expedition to map the Oregon Trail, stretching as far as South Pass in present-day Wyoming. Carson listened carefully, asked a few thoughtful questions, and accepted the job. His pay, $100 per month, a strong wage for the time, though hardly extravagant given the risks. That first expedition was such a success that Fremont insisted on keeping Carson as his lead guide for future journeys. Over the next several years, the two would travel thousands of miles together, through deserts, over mountain passes, along rivers, and into regions few Americans had seen. They documented plant and animal species, charted previously unknown terrain, and laid the groundwork for the enormous westward expansion that would define the next generation. Their partnership worked because it was a meeting of opposites, Fremont's formal training and political access balanced by Carson's first-hand experience and intuitive mastery of the land. But the alliance would also lead them both into darker waters, especially during their campaigns in California. Take a moment and breathe in slowly, picturing California not as it is now, but as it was in the 1840s. It wasn't a bustling, urban state. It wasn't even American. It was a remote territory of Mexico, largely undeveloped and sparsely inhabited. Along the Pacific coastline, Spanish missions dotted the land. Small pueblos housed Mexican citizens. A handful of trading posts welcomed ships from the east. But inland, vast stretches of wilderness remained untouched, broken only by scattered ranches where Mexican landowners raised cattle. Much of the land still belonged to Native American tribes, though disease and conflict had dramatically reduced their populations. Into this setting came Fremont and Carson in 1845, officially on another mapping expedition. But many suspected their true purpose. Tensions between the U.S. and Mexico were nearing a boiling point. Disputes over Texas had grown volatile. Many believed Fremont's mission was not purely scientific, but political, to agitate American settlers in California and push the region toward U.S. annexation. Whatever his orders, Fremont's actions escalated matters. When Mexican authorities ordered him to leave California, he retreated north to Oregon, only to return soon after and link up with American settlers increasingly frustrated under Mexican rule. The details of what followed are murky, but one fact is clear. Fremont gave material support, arms and ammunition, to a group of settlers who seized the town of Sonoma on June 14, 1846. They raised a crude but symbolic flag, a piece of unbleached cotton with a red flannel stripe, a red star, and a drawing of a grizzly bear. It wasn't a very good drawing. Mexican observers joked it looked more like a pig and nicknamed it the hog flag. Still, this rough creation would become the bear flag, the foundation for California's state flag today. And with that, your body softens further. The blankets hold you in warmth. The story carries you onward. Though short-lived, the Bear Flag Republic sparked a chain reaction. Within a month, U.S. forces arrived, and California was claimed as part of the Mexican-American War. Fremont's role earned him a court-martial, but his sentence was commuted by President Polk. Carson's contributions, though less documented, were no less essential. He served as Fremont's loyal second-in-command, delivering messages, scouting enemy movement, and fighting in several key skirmishes. For both men, the conquest of California marked a turning point, an achievement that would define their careers and forever alter the landscape of the American West. The coastline of California in the mid-1800s wasn't dotted with bustling cities or highways. It was a sparse and scattered region of modest settlements. Small pueblos housed Mexican citizens, and missions built by Spanish priests served both religious and agricultural functions. These missions had long been central to life in Alta California. Alongside them were a handful of trading posts, humble wooden outposts where American and European ships occasionally dropped anchor to replenish supplies and barter goods. But beyond the coast, the interior of California remained a vast and largely undeveloped wilderness. Wide, open ranges stretched for miles, interrupted only by sprawling ranchos owned by Mexican landholders who raised cattle across immense tracts of land. Though their presence had diminished due to disease, displacement, and waves of settler encroachment, Native American tribes still controlled large portions of the interior. Their numbers had been severely reduced since the arrival of European settlers, and tensions simmered beneath the surface of this contested land. It was into this volatile landscape that John C. Fremont and Kit Carson arrived in 1845, officially on another surveying mission. But the timing raised eyebrows. Relations between the United States and Mexico had been unraveling quickly. Disputes over the annexation of Texas and unclear boundary lines made war feel inevitable. Many suspected that Fremont's real orders went beyond map-making, that he was sent to stir unrest, encourage rebellion among American settlers, and pave the way for U.S. control over California. Whether by design or by consequence, Fremont's actions soon helped ignite what became known as the Bear Flag Revolt. After being ordered to leave California by Mexican officials, Fremont briefly withdrew to Oregon. But soon after, he returned and met with American settlers increasingly dissatisfied with Mexican rule. The exact details of what followed remain debated by historians, but one thing is clear. Fremont offered material support, arms, ammunition, and strategic guidance to a group of settlers who took action. On June 14, 1846, these settlers stormed the small town of Sonoma, seizing control without much resistance. To mark their new and temporary republic, they crafted a flag, rough and hastily sewn together. The story of that flag's creation has become part of frontier lore. With no access to formal materials, William Todd, one of the participants in the revolt, pieced together a banner using a strip of red flannel for the bottom and a large rectangle of unbleached cotton for the main body. The design featured a red five-pointed star, borrowed from the Texas flag, and a hand-drawn image of a California grizzly bear. It wasn't exactly a masterpiece. Some onlookers claimed the bear resembled a pig more than a fearsome predator, and Mexican officials mocked it as the hog flag. But crude or not, this homemade symbol of defiance would eventually evolve into the state flag of California. As your body begins to sink further into rest, your breath growing slower and deeper, the story of this rebellion begins to soften into memory. The Bear Flag Republic was short-lived. Within a month of its declaration, U.S. naval forces arrived in Monterey and raised the American flag, claiming California as U.S. territory. The Mexican-American War had officially begun in May of 1846, and now California was part of the battlefield. The Bear Flag was lowered, never again to fly as the emblem of an independent nation. But its legacy endured, later adopted in revised form when California joined the Union in 1850. Fremont's involvement in the Bear Flag Revolt did not come without consequences. He was court-martialed by the U.S. military for insubordination and mutiny, having acted without direct authorization from his commanding officers. Though the court found him guilty, President Polk, who may have tacitly supported Fremont's mission, commuted his sentence. As for Kit Carson, his role in the uprising is less clearly documented, but he remained Fremont's most trusted field lieutenant throughout this period. Carson carried sensitive messages, scouted enemy movements, and participated in skirmishes with Mexican forces. For both men, California became a defining chapter in their legacy, one of conquest, ambition, and controversy. But while Fremont and Carson were working to reshape California's future, thousands of everyday Americans were heading west, chasing dreams of land, prosperity, and a new beginning. Their path lay along the Oregon Trail. This legendary route stretched more than 2,000 miles from Independence, Missouri, to the lush Willamette Valley in Oregon. For decades, it was the main corridor for American settlers migrating westward. And after the discovery of gold in 1848, many continued along the trail toward California in search of fortune. The journey was perilous. Estimates suggest that 1 in every 10 immigrants perished along the trail. That's somewhere between 10,000 and 30,000 lives lost. To put it in perspective, that's roughly 20 graves for every mile of trail. There were many reasons for such a high death toll. Accidents were a frequent cause. Wagons would overturn while crossing rivers. Children and adults alike might fall beneath wagon wheels. Firearms, carelessly handled or dropped, could discharge and injure or kill. But disease claimed even more lives. The most feared was cholera, which could decimate an entire wagon train in just days. Victims died from dehydration and shock, with little that could be done to stop its spread. With no antibiotics, even minor infections from cuts or burns could prove fatal. The physical challenges were relentless. Blistering heat on the plains gave way to freezing mountain nights. Dust storms, sudden snowfalls, and long droughts were constant threats. Many travelers ran dangerously low on food and water, and hunger often meant subsisting on hardtack, bacon, or whatever could be hunted along the way. Though popular culture often overemphasizes it, Native American attacks were relatively rare, at least in the early years. Many tribes were willing to trade with immigrants, and sometimes even offered guidance. But as settler traffic increased and more land was claimed, peaceful relations grew strained, leading to inevitable conflict. Your breathing deepens again, and your muscles continue to unwind. There's a rhythm to these stories, hardship, resilience, survival, that mirrors your own slow descent into sleep. Despite the risks, tens of thousands of families still chose to undertake the journey. What compelled them? For some, it was the promise of free land, offered under the Donation Land Claim Act. For others, it was a desire to escape economic hardship, crowded cities, or religious persecution. Their journey began each spring, timed so the prairie grasses would be tall enough to sustain their livestock. But they also needed to reach the mountain passes before snowfall made them impassable. It was a delicate window, and missing it could mean disaster. The pace was slow, averaging just 15 miles per day. That meant a full 5 to 6 months on the trail. Half a year of walking, of camping in the open, of making do with crude shelter and constant uncertainty. The wagons they used weren't the towering Conestoga freight wagons depicted in films. Most families traveled with modest farm wagons, smaller, lighter, and easier to repair. These were typically covered with canvas to shield their belongings from rain and sun. The wagons were drawn by oxen, not fast, but strong and enduring. Their steady pace made them ideal for pulling heavy loads across long distances. Oxen needed care, food, and water, and in return, they carried entire lives on their backs. Daily life along the trail followed a strict, repetitive rhythm. Travelers woke before dawn. They started a small fire and cooked a simple breakfast, cornmeal mush, perhaps, or salted pork. As the morning sun lifted above the horizon, the wagon train began its slow progression westward. They would travel through the morning until the heat of midday, then pause briefly for rest, food, and to tend their animals. During the hottest part of the day, the wagon train would pause its relentless journey westward. Families took refuge in whatever shade they could find, hoping to escape the sun's oppressive glare. But as the lights softened toward evening, the settlers returned to their routines, circling the wagons to form a makeshift corral, not for defense as Hollywood dramas might suggest, but to prevent livestock from wandering during the night. It was a practical measure, born from necessity, not cinematic heroism. Once the animals were settled, travelers prepared a simple supper over small fires, meals that rarely varied. Day after day, the menu remained the same: bacon, beans, cornmeal mush, and biscuits. Fresh meat was a welcome surprise, not a guarantee. It took time and effort to hunt a deer or buffalo, and those hours spent off-trail could delay the group dangerously. Occasionally, someone might shoot a rabbit or trade with local tribes for game, but those meals were the exception, not the norm. Fruits and vegetables were rarities, only appearing when settlers traded with Native Americans or foraged for wild berries and edible greens. They weren't always easy to recognize or safe to eat, which made them a gamble. But when found, they were a vital source of vitamins that helped fend off illness. Water, however, remained the most pressing and unpredictable concern. Sometimes the travelers would trudge for days across arid plains, searching for even a muddy creek. When they did find water, it was often cloudy, bitter, or contaminated from thousands of hooves and wagon wheels that had passed before them. Drinking from those stagnant pools invited sickness. Many travelers fell ill from bad water, adding to the already staggering number of deaths on the trail. Disease was a constant shadow. Diarrhea, dysentery, and fever spread like wildfire through crowded camps. Some recovered, many did not. And yet, in the midst of this hardship, fate sometimes played strange tricks. One of the most notorious figures of the American West owed his very existence to the Oregon Trail. Though Butch Cassidy was not a traditional frontiersman, his legend would grow to rival any of them. Born in Utah in 1866, Cassidy, whose real name was Robert Leroy Parker, entered a world carved out by pioneers and shaped by survival. According to frontier lore, Cassidy's parents, Maximilian Parker and Campbell Gillies, were Scottish immigrants who had come to America seeking a new life. Their paths converged not in a city, but on the Oregon Trail itself. They were part of a group of Mormon pioneers making the long and difficult trek to the Salt Lake Valley, following the call of their faith into the wilderness. Their journey was anything but smooth. They belonged to a group that would later be remembered as part of the Mormon handcart tragedy. In the mid-1800s, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints encouraged European converts to emigrate to Utah using handcarts, small, two-wheeled carts pulled by hand rather than oxen. The church believed this would lower costs and speed up the migration. But the reality was far harsher. In 1856, two large companies of Mormon handcart pioneers left Iowa City, Iowa, bound for Salt Lake City. They numbered over 1,000 and departed late in the season, a critical mistake. As they crossed the Wyoming plains, an early winter storm descended upon them. Snow and wind battered their ranks. With limited supplies, thin clothing, and inadequate shelter, many became desperately ill. Food ran short, and some resorted to boiling leather from their shoes and belts just to create broth. Hunger gnawed at them, and the biting cold stole fingers and toes. Some families lost half their number before the rescue parties could reach them. Over 200 pioneers perished, and many others lived with permanent injuries from frostbite. But somehow, Maximilian and Ann survived. They made it to Utah, built a home, and raised a son who would one day become a symbol of rebellion and lawlessness in the American West. Without the Oregon Trail, and without the near-tragic path of his parents, Butch Cassidy might never have been born. As we consider the figures who shaped frontier history, Some were infamous like Cassidy. Others were guides, quiet forces who helped expeditions succeed through wilderness most settlers couldn't begin to comprehend. Kit Carson was one such guide, but he was not alone. Another, perhaps even more iconic, was a young Shoshone woman named Sacagawea. Her name would become synonymous with courage, resilience, and grace under unimaginable pressure. Sacagawea's life didn't begin on the trail. It began in the Lemhi Shoshone tribe, around 1788, in what is now Idaho. Her name, often translated as Bird Woman, was spoken in the Shoshone language, though historical accounts have spelled it many ways. At around the age of 10, her world was turned upside down. A raiding party of Hidatsa warriors attacked her village and captured several young girls, including Sacagawea. It was a traumatic upheaval. She was taken from her home and family and forced to walk hundreds of miles to a Hidatsa village near present-day Bismarck, North Dakota. There, she had to adapt, learning a new language, new customs, and a new way of life, all before she was old enough to understand what had happened. Your jaw softens. Your breathing steadies. These stories press gently against your mind like warm blankets, comforting and vivid. The historical record becomes less clear for a time. But by most accounts, when she was around 13, Sacagawea was either sold or gambled away to a French-Canadian fur trapper named Toussaint Charbonneau. Some say she became his wife by arrangement. Others suggest she was traded in a card game. Whatever the truth, she ended up in his household, living among the Hidatsa, navigating the boundaries between cultures. Charbonneau was older, likely in his 40s, and already had another native wife, a Hidatsa woman named Otter Woman. He had been living in the area for some time, conducting fur trade and learning tribal languages. Sacagawea, with her ability to speak both Shoshone and Hidatsa, became a linguistic asset as well as a partner. By the winter of 1804 to 1805, Sacagawea was pregnant with her first child. That same winter, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark arrived at the Hidatsa Mandan villages while preparing for their expedition to the Pacific. They were looking for interpreters, individuals who could help them navigate the terrain and communicate with the tribes they would meet along the way. Charbonneau offered his services, but while he was technically the one hired, it was Sacagawea who quickly proved to be the far more essential addition to the Corps of Discovery. On February 11, 1805, she gave birth to a son, Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau. Just 2 months later, with her newborn strapped to her back in a cradleboard, she joined the expedition. Picture it, a young girl of no more than 17, carrying a baby, walking alongside dozens of men, all of them preparing to journey into unknown lands. They moved upriver by canoe and on foot. The weather was capricious, warm and bright one day, cold and soaking wet the next. When they encountered impassable rapids, Sacagawea climbed steep banks while keeping her infant safe. Her presence served several purposes. Most importantly, she could act as an interpreter when the expedition reached Shoshone territory, a vital connection if the explorers hoped to acquire horses for crossing the Rocky Mountains. But that wasn't her only contribution. Sacagawea knew which roots and plants were safe to eat. She knew how to prepare them, what could cure sickness, and what could keep scurvy at bay. Her foraging skills helped stretch the expedition's meager rations when game was scarce. And just as importantly, perhaps more so, her very presence signaled peace. A woman traveling with a baby was not a war party. To the native tribes they encountered, her presence helped reassure others that Lewis and Clark's group came in exploration, not aggression. The presence of a woman carrying an infant signaled something powerful on the American frontier. It told other tribes that this group was not a war party. No war party, no matter how unconventional, would ever travel with a woman and a newborn child. Sacagawea's presence on the Lewis and Clark expedition wasn't just symbolic. It was tactical, calming tensions and inviting cooperation. One of her most critical contributions came when the expedition reached Shoshone territory in present-day Idaho. By sheer fortune, or perhaps destiny, the leader of the Shoshone band they encountered turned out to be her long-lost brother, Kamiwait, whom she had not seen since the day she was abducted years before as a child. That unexpected and emotional reunion gave Lewis and Clark a vital diplomatic edge, allowing them to secure the horses they desperately needed to make it through the unforgiving mountain terrain ahead. But Sacagawea's value wasn't just in family connections or language skills. She proved herself again in a moment of chaos and danger. While traveling down the Missouri River, one of the expedition's boats capsized in rough, surging waters. The vessel was carrying essential cargo: maps, journals, instruments, and irreplaceable scientific samples. In an instant, all that precious material was swept away in the fast-moving current. Sacagawea, traveling on a separate boat with her infant son on her back, immediately sprang into action. Without hesitation, she leapt ashore, chased after the drifting crates, and began gathering everything she could reach. Her quick thinking and determination saved documents and specimens that would have been impossible to replicate. Without her, much of the expedition's work might have been lost forever, and entire portions of their progress would have had to be redone or abandoned entirely. Throughout the journey, Sacagawea endured every hardship the men did. Day after day, she walked for miles, sometimes over punishing terrain, often with her child strapped to her back. She slept on the cold ground through rain, wind, and bitter cold. She faced the same dangers: wild animals, unpredictable rivers, and tense encounters with unfamiliar tribes. And yet, through it all, she never complained. She remained composed, focused, and capable, earning the deep respect of everyone around her. William Clark, in particular, developed a deep fondness for both Sacagawea and her child, whom he nicknamed Pomp, or Pompey, a name that would stick with the boy for years. After the expedition concluded, Clark extended an offer to help raise and educate Pompey in St. Louis, a proposal that both Sacagawea and her husband, Charbonneau, eventually accepted. Now your body feels even more at ease. The weight of your limbs is melting into the mattress. Each breath you take draws you deeper into comfort, your muscles gently surrendering to rest. The story unfolds as you lie there, cozy and still, following the footsteps of extraordinary lives. After the Corps of Discovery returned to St. Louis in September of 1806, the historical trail of Sacagawea becomes faint. Some records suggest that she and Charbonneau remained in the area for a time, taking Clark up on his offer to help educate their son, Jean-Baptiste. Clark had developed a sincere attachment to the boy and wanted to give him every opportunity for a better life through formal education. Other accounts tell a different story, that Sacagawea and her husband returned to the upper Missouri River, where Charbonneau resumed his role as a fur trader and interpreter, living a semi-nomadic life among the rivers and trading posts of the region. In 1809, the family again accepted Clark's invitation to relocate to St. Louis, where Charbonneau was granted land to farm. But city life never suited the wilderness-bred trader. Before long, Charbonneau sold the land and returned to the fur trade, Sacagawea following him once more into the remote reaches of the frontier. The most widely accepted historical account places Sacagawea's death in December of 1812 at Fort Manuel Lisa, located in what is now South Dakota. Fur company documents note that she succumbed to a putrid fever, likely typhoid. She would have been just 24 years old. William Clark, by then acting as the guardian of Jean-Baptiste, made a notation next to her name in his records: dead. Yet not all believe this was the end of her story. According to oral traditions from certain Native American communities, Sacagawea did not die young. Instead, they say, she eventually left Charbonneau, returned to her Shoshone people, and lived out a long life, dying in Wyoming in 1884 at nearly 100 years old. This version of her fate, while compelling, lacks the documentary evidence historians typically require. Still, it remains part of the cultural memory of who she was. Regardless of how or when she died, Sacagawea's impact on the Lewis and Clark expedition, and on American history itself, is undeniable. Her linguistic abilities, her knowledge of edible plants, her resilience, and her calm under pressure helped ensure the success of a mission that might otherwise have failed. Today, she is one of the most widely recognized Native American women in history, honored in statues, on currency, and in school curricula as a symbol of courage, grace, and quiet heroism. Now your breath is even, slow, and deep. Each inhale draws peace into your chest. Each exhale releases tension from your shoulders and back. Your eyelids feel gently heavier now, not from exhaustion, but from stillness. As you listen, the warmth of your bed surrounds you like a cocoon. And we continue. While we've spent time with legendary figures like Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett, John C. Fremont, Kit Carson, and Sacagawea, the story of the American frontier isn't just about singular heroes. It's also the story of countless ordinary people who left everything familiar behind in search of possibility, risking it all to build something new. These settlers, homesteaders, laborers, and families formed the living fabric of frontier life. Their days were hard, their joys small but profound, and their survival depended on grit, community, and an unbreakable will. Life on the frontier was stripped of illusion. Everything was immediate, essential, physical. There were no conveniences, no taps to turn, no refrigerators, no grocery stores, no doctors within reach. Every necessity, light, heat, food, water, required personal labor, and the results of failure could be fatal. Even something as simple as illumination was a challenge. Once the sun dipped below the horizon, the world went black. There were no street lamps, no electric bulbs humming in the ceiling, not even gaslight, unless you were near a city. The only light came from fire, candles, oil lamps, or open hearths. Candles themselves were precious, made painstakingly from rendered animal fat or beeswax, then molded or dipped by hand. The process was smelly, messy, and time-consuming. Cotton or flax wicks had to be prepared in advance. The result? A flickering little flame about as bright as a birthday candle. That dim light dictated how families lived. Most couldn't afford to waste candles on leisure. Evening hours were short and practical, mending clothes by firelight, carving tools, telling stories in the soft glow. Water was another daily burden. There were no pipes, no taps, no water heaters. Water had to be hauled, bucket by bucket, from a spring, a well, or a nearby stream. In the winter, settlers chopped through ice to reach the water beneath. In summer, dry spells often forced families to walk miles just to find a trickle. The average household used only about 5 gallons of water per day for drinking, cooking, bathing, and laundry. In contrast, the average American today uses thousands of gallons monthly without a second thought. Bathing was rare, maybe once a week in the summer, once a month, or less in winter. Laundry was done infrequently and always by hand. The work was grueling, repetitive, and slow. Preserving food was another monumental task. With no refrigeration, meat had to be salted, smoked, or dried quickly. Fruits were pickled or turned into jam. Vegetables were stored in cellars, often dug directly into the ground, where the earth's natural coolness helped delay spoilage. Every season brought its own rhythm. Spring was for planting. And beyond that, well, we'll pick up that story next. The presence of a woman traveling with an infant signaled to every tribe they encountered that this was not a war party. In native cultures, war bands never moved with women and children, so Sacagawea's presence, especially with a child on her back, sent an unmistakable message of peaceful intent. This small but powerful detail helped protect the expedition on more than one occasion. Perhaps her most significant contribution came when the Corps of Discovery reached Shoshone territory in what is now Idaho. By a remarkable stroke of fortune, the leader of the band they encountered turned out to be none other than Camawate, Sacagawea's brother, separated from her since the day she was kidnapped as a child years earlier. Their emotional reunion proved to be a turning point in the expedition, as it allowed Lewis and Clark to negotiate the purchase of desperately needed horses to carry them over the Rocky Mountains, resources they might never have secured without Sacagawea's help. But her value went far beyond diplomacy. During one particularly perilous stretch on the Missouri River, the expedition's main boat capsized in turbulent water. It was carrying crucial scientific instruments, supplies, and irreplaceable documentation, everything from maps and journals to plant and animal specimens. The entire mission was at risk of being lost to the current. Acting quickly and without hesitation, Sacagawea, traveling in a nearby canoe with her infant son, leapt into action. She made her way to the bank and began gathering up whatever she could from the swirling water: bags, scrolls, equipment, anything within reach. Her quick thinking and courage preserved vital materials that otherwise would have been lost, possibly saving the expedition from total failure. The historical record notes that without her decisive actions, the team may have been forced to retrace large portions of their route or abandon parts of the journey altogether. Throughout the entire expedition, Sacagawea endured every hardship alongside the men. She walked dozens of miles a day, often with her child on her back. She slept under the stars or on cold, wet ground, exposed to the same elements as the rest of the Corps. She faced wild animals, crossed icy rivers, and entered unfamiliar tribal territories, all without complaint. Over time, she earned not only the respect but also the deep admiration of the expedition members. William Clark, in particular, formed a strong bond with her and with her son, whom he nicknamed Pomp or Pompey, a term of endearment he used throughout his journals. After the journey ended, Clark offered to provide for the child's education in St. Louis, an offer that Sacagawea and her husband Charbonneau eventually accepted. By now, your body feels completely at ease. Your limbs lie heavy and warm against the bed. Your breaths are deeper, slower, and smoother. As you follow the rhythm of the story, you feel yourself gently sinking into a state of comfort and stillness. We continue our journey westward, guided by these unforgettable voices of history. After returning from the expedition in September 1806, Sacagawea's trail becomes less clear. Historical records offer conflicting accounts of her later life. Some say she and Charbonneau settled near St. Louis for a time, taking Clark up on his offer to help raise and educate Jean-Baptiste. Clark's fondness for the boy endured, and he continued to play a role in the child's upbringing. However, other sources suggest the family later returned to the upper Missouri River region, where Charbonneau resumed his life as a fur trader and interpreter among various tribes. In 1809, the couple was again invited by Clark to relocate to St. Louis. Charbonneau accepted, was granted land, and was encouraged to take up farming. But life behind a plow didn't suit the restless frontiersman, and within a matter of months he sold the land and returned with Sacagawea to the life he knew best, roaming the wilderness in pursuit of trade. According to fur company records, Sacagawea passed away at Fort Manuel Lisa, in what is now South Dakota, in December 1812. The cause was noted as putrid fever, likely typhoid. She was only about 24 years old. Clark, who had by then become the legal guardian of her son, marked her passing with a single word in his records: dead. Yet not all believe that was truly the end of her story. Oral traditions among some Native American tribes tell of a different fate. In these accounts, Sacagawea left Charbonneau and eventually made her way back to the Shoshone people. She is said to have lived a long life among her own, dying in Wyoming in 1884 at nearly 100 years old. This alternate version, though less supported by contemporary documentation, continues to be passed down within Shoshone communities. Regardless of which story is true, Sacagawea's impact is unquestionable. Her ability to speak multiple languages, identify native plants, and navigate unfamiliar terrain made her essential to the success of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Her bravery, intelligence, and resilience left a lasting legacy. She is one of the few Native American women whose name is recognized across the fabric of American history, a symbol of the vital yet often overlooked roles women played in shaping the frontier. Your breath has slowed into a soft, steady rhythm. Each inhale draws in calm. Each exhale lets go of weight. The blanket rests gently over you as we shift from the stories of a few remarkable individuals to the countless unnamed souls who traveled west in search of something more. While figures like Boone, Crockett, Fremont, Carson, and Sacagawea captured public imagination, the American frontier was also built by thousands of ordinary people who packed up their lives and risked everything to chase the promise of freedom, land, and reinvention. Their daily lives were filled with gritty labor, unrelenting challenge, and simple joys. They carved out homes where there was once only wilderness, planted crops in harsh soil, raised families in one-room cabins. Their triumphs were often small: a successful hunt, a harvest that survived frost, a baby born healthy. But each of these moments contributed to the unfolding of a larger story, the collective, often invisible labor of building something permanent on untamed ground. Life on the frontier stripped everything down to the essentials. There was no room for luxury, little patience for pretense. Everything took more time, more energy, more grit. Even basic conveniences we take for granted today, things like turning on a faucet, flicking a light switch, or buying food, were unimaginable luxuries. When the sun dipped below the horizon, darkness arrived in full. There were no street lamps, no overhead lights, not even gas lanterns in most places. Illumination came from candlelight, hearth fires, or oil lamps. But candles were precious. Often handmade from tallow or beeswax, they required hours to craft. Fat had to be boiled, wicks twisted from cotton or flax, wax poured, cooled, dipped again. A single candle flickered dimly, barely bright enough to read by. Most families conserved their candles carefully, organizing their entire day around sunlight and wrapping up activity once dusk set in. Fetching water was no less exhausting. There were no taps to twist open, no hot water heaters waiting on demand. Every drop had to be carried in buckets from a nearby spring, stream, or dug well. In winter, thick ice had to be cracked before access was possible. In summer, sources often dried up, requiring even longer journeys. A typical family used about 5 gallons per day for everything: drinking, cooking, washing, even bathing. By contrast, the average modern American uses thousands of gallons daily without even thinking about it. On the frontier, water was sacred. Bathing was infrequent at best. Once a week in summer, if time and water allowed. In winter, perhaps once a month, if at all. Laundry was a grueling event, often reserved for special occasions or once-a-month efforts when the weather allowed. Without soap or machines, clothes were scrubbed by hand using river water and flat stones, then hung to dry in the wind or near a fire. Food preservation was a constant concern. With no refrigeration, meat had to be salted, dried, or smoked almost immediately after slaughter. Vegetables were pickled or turned into preserves. Fruits were dried or made into jams. Root vegetables like turnips or potatoes were stored in underground root cellars, simple dugouts that maintained cool, steady temperatures. These strategies were crucial for survival, especially during the lean months when fresh food was scarce. And so the cycle of seasons dictated everything. Spring was for planting, summer for tending and foraging, fall for harvesting and preserving, and winter for enduring. Through it all, frontier families depended not just on hard work, but on each other. The community was survival. Neighbors shared tools, helped raise barns, traded goods, and gathered for meals or music when they could. It was a harsh life, but also a deeply connected one. And now, as you lie warm and still, breathing evenly, you carry these stories with you. Stories of resilience, sacrifice, and quiet heroism. The wild frontier may be gone, but its spirit, raw, enduring, and full of wonder, still lingers in the quiet places of your imagination.